We are working against time. Without any introduction, please, I'll let Dr. Jan Pospisil start his introduction, and as soon as he's finished, he will join me here. I'll talk also for 5 minutes about what's going on in South Sudan, about the elections. It's an intriguing subject, and then after that, the floor is yours for questions. Welcome, Jan, if you could start. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. It's great to be here. So thanks for the invitation. What I'm going to do in the next 20-25 minutes is presenting you some results we have from a survey we are running in South Sudan. This is a team of basically a senior team of 4, which is led by David Deng. It's me and Christopher Ringer-Mark from University of Juba, and Sophia Dawkins, who is our methods specialist. We run this survey now for 4 iterations now. So basically we started in 2019. We were a bit disrupted by COVID, obviously. But our intention is to run this annually to generate longitudinal data about the political situation, basically, and also the security situation in South Sudan. And since basically elections are on the horizon, for 2 years now, we have asked people particularly about their perceptions of the upcoming elections, what they expect out of that, and then also more or less as far as it was and is possible given the security context about party popularity. So we have some insights, I guess, that might be interesting to see if these elections are going to happen, then whom people might vote for. Just to give like a broad, I mean, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the current context of the transition phase in South Sudan, and where basically these elections come from. Initially there was a peace agreement in 2018, as you know, which kind of ended the South Sudanese civil war and established, after a very long pre-transitional period, as they called it, basically a power-sharing kind of unity government that included 6 factions. All positions were basically given based on a power-sharing arrangement in this agreement. And then there was a formal transitional phase starting, which was initially planned for 3 years. In this transitional phase, as the agreement has foreseen, there should have been the implementation of a variety of things, starting from basically a constitution, there's a census, unified forces, a transitional justice mechanisms, quite comprehensively. Most of these things haven't happened. So at the end of this transitional period was basically, and this was meant as the segue into kind of normal politics, there were meant elections to happen. So since at the formal end of the 3 years, there was nothing going into that direction, the parties came together and agreed on a so-called roadmap, which basically extended this transitional period by another 2 years and had, again, a very rigid implementation structure of all these things that hadn't happened before. This now extended period of this roadmap is meant to end in February 25, which is roughly 1.5 years from now. And it plans now for elections in December 24. This is the date that is set in this roadmap and agreed by the parties. And it would say, again, that before these elections are going to happen, there should be a census, there should be a constitution, there should be a number of laws passed, there should be necessary unified forces established, so basically all the kind of reintegration of the various armed factions into one national army should have happened by then. There should be transitional justice mechanisms, and also importantly, there should be a return by all the refugees in the neighboring countries, particularly in Uganda and Kenya, and there should be also a return internally displaced to their various regions of origin. All this is kind of necessary for these elections to happen because the Election Act foresees a quite complicated procedure that is a combination between a first-past-the-post system and a party list system. So all these things would be very easy in a way if we would just have party lists. But with first-past-the-post, this means you have electoral constituencies where people are going to be elected, and of course then people need to be registered in these constituencies and need also to vote in these constituencies in order to get a first past the post system like we have it in the UK going. Many of these things, again, have not happened. So we have no constitution, we have no real return, we have a severely delayed process of army and armed forces integration. Some things have happened, but many have not. We have no census, we have no transitional justice mechanisms, but we still have this December 24 deadline for elections, and the preparations for these elections basically have started already, and the period is rather short to do that. I think the elections will happen, I'll expand on that later, for a variety of reasons, but this is just to give you context of the data I'm going to show you now. So there is a certain likelihood that these elections are going to happen. The questions that we also try to answer with this, and we try to intervene with our data, is what are actually good enough conditions for elections to happen, given that it won't happen as planned, and all these things won't be in place before it happens, and where are the particular risks, the particular risk factors, especially when we talk about the security situation and potentially violent outcomes of such elections in South Sudan. So this is basically the background where the data I'm going to show here is coming in. Just to quickly say, because I'll show some of the graphs, and it's really important to keep in mind what these graphs are going to tell us and what they're not going to tell us. We've done the survey in 15 counties across South Sudan. As you know, in total there are 78 counties, so we haven't been everywhere. The 15 counties spread across all 10 states, and also includes the PBOR administrative area. And we are able to speak with confidence about these 15 counties. Here we random sampled in a way that it statistically holds, and we see also from year to year that the data is kind of really reliable for the areas where we are. But we are not able to speak in a way for the country as a whole. So this has to be always to take into account when we kind of think of all this what we say, and we are kind of thinking about what South Sudanese kind of say and think. Statistically, this is not really possible to say. We are able to speak about these 15 counties. These 15 counties represent quite a lot of South Sudan, but definitely not the population as a whole. It's just not, we thought about once trying to do it as a national representative survey, but this is already something that also speaks to the census. This is a logistically incredibly difficult affair and also incredibly expensive, so beyond our funding. Just to say, initially the survey, I have to say this, initially the survey was funded by the US State Department and has meanwhile moved to British funding, so it's now funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK. So in total we have per round, so you see here we did 4 waves of data collection, which enables us to show also some trends, especially in terms of everyday security of people, starting from 2021 to the last one that ended in April this year. We had per round like 3,500 to 4,500 respondents, and in total we have now done about 13,300 interviews in this survey, so it is a fair amount. As I said, for these 15 counties, we can speak with some confidence that it is like that. We oversampled IDP and POC sites in the country, so the views of especially displaced are a bit over-represented in the overall sample. And whoever is then interested in going further into the data, we are happy to share. It's basically open access. Whoever wants to work with this can work with this. So we're definitely happy to share whatever we have here. Just to see where we were with the survey, this is basically more or less where settlements are across the country, and the blue areas are based on GPS data where we collected. So you see that basically we tried to be more or less in areas where people are. You see also where we have huge gaps, especially northern Jonglei, southern Unity, southern Upper Nile. We have definitely quite some gaps in the area. also like we are quite weak in Eastern Equatoria, so we are aware of this. This is always a question of funding as well. When we get more money, we can do more things with that, obviously. So it's not so that these are just like restrictions we have to face. The first element that I want to show, and this is a bit actually good news, is perceptions of peace and everyday peace and everyday security in the country over the last years of the transitional period. What we did here was that we worked with a methodology that had been introduced by Roger McGinty and Pamina Virchow called Everyday Peace Indicators. And we did, before we embarked on really surveying, we did a round of qualitative research in 2019. So before COVID, we went to a number of places in South Sudan and did like focus groups, discussions, interviews, and tried to identify how people would basically identify even if there is peace. So what would be peace for people? How would they see it in their everyday lives? And we came up then. I mean, this is obviously, since South Sudan is you know a very diverse country. There's a number of very particular indicators that came up. We wanted to have then indicators in place that we could survey across the country as a whole. So what would be indicators basically that would work for everybody? And these are things that probably are not too surprising, but we came up with a set of 5 indicators of everyday security that we surveyed. First is definitely, and this came up basically everywhere, it's road security. So can you travel to places on the bigger roads without getting harassed or shot on the way, or full of checkpoints and these kinds of things. Then it's the second element was then can you go to markets, then can you go out at night to attend a neighbor without the risk of being harmed. And then also, what about cultural activities? Can it be held? Is it possible that they are conducted? Can you attend them without risk? So these were essentially the everyday security elements we had, and we created out of this an index here that you see up on the left hand here. EPI means Everyday Peace Indicator Index, basically. And here you see actually something which is kind of, it was a bit surprising to us, but it is somehow an encouraging sign that this indicator has become better, especially over the last 3 years. You see here in green, the more green, the safer people feel. We are very safe to safe, like light green, to very unsafe in high red up. Here you see that there is a significant improvement of people feeling safe across the country as a whole. Of course, again, this is a very diverse picture, and I mean it's written in fairly slow, fairly small letters. But you see here also the development in some of the in all the counties we have been. And here you see basically different kind of results. You see basically Tibor, like in the middle here, the situation is still very, very bad and hasn't really improved over the years. You see an interesting development in Bor South, which is also like also Jonglei. Here, people who feel like very unsafe have also increased. So Bor has not necessarily become better. See an interesting development in Bor where there's the number of people who feel very safe has increased, as well as people who feel very unsafe. So you see here that there is interesting developments happening of people being hit like really differently. You see though, like in also in areas where we know there's huge issues, especially in the Equatorias, that things are not good, but things have still significantly improved. You see second from the top on the right hand side, Ye, you know, like in Central Equatoria, close to the Ugandan border, was one of the most unsafe places, especially over the last years. And here you see some encouraging signs, despite some quite significant challenges that are still there, that the number of people who feel now safe somewhat in Ye has remarkably improved actually, which is interesting, you know. So overall, it's not that that there's nothing really changing in South Sudan, and this data shows a bit of a different picture from what we hear usually from when we talk about a country that everything is kind of so bad it's getting worse and worse. Not necessarily, and not necessarily everywhere. This is really important to take into account. And this reflects also people's perceptions of what they think about the peace process, the peace process in more general kind of ways. We've asked this big question, which tells actually quite a lot. Is South Sudan at peace, in your opinion? And this is the one down here at the left. And here you see as well, we started basically in the first rounds with a 50-50 thing. So half of the population would say no, South Sudan is not at peace. Half would say yeah, we are at peace. And this has changed over the last 2 years to a situation where now 2/3 almost would say yeah, South Sudan is at peace. So you see quite a remarkable improvement that was also for us, I have to say, not necessarily expected. But it shows us a quite solid trend that we see here. Let's go in some of the more regional trends and some of the more detailed findings also in terms of civic space. Related, and here you see already like the big differences between the various regions in South Sudan. One of the questions related to peace as well was how would people see the prospects over the next few years? And this is now from the last survey round, from this survey round, just the most recent data from March, April this year in these 15 counties. And here you see incredibly significant actually differences between the three main regions of the country. Where, like, I mean, in Bargazal, where we are almost hitting, like, we have 75% of the people being optimistic. This goes mainly back to situations in Warab, lakes now, as you might be aware of, there was a new governor coming in like 2 years ago, in 20. He came in with a real iron fist in the state and basically turned the security situation around. There is kind of huge allegations of human rights abuses and all these kinds of things, but overall, what we find in our data, overall, his approach is very, very popular. And has also improved like SPLM popularity in the state, but also led to more optimism towards future developments. Even though this is highly doubtful if this kind of hold, if this will hold, but especially in lakes, Warab, parts of the Bargazal states, people are quite optimistic about future developments. You see basically a quite opposite picture in Greater Equatoria, where still there's a slight leaning towards optimism, but people being very, very skeptical about the transitional process and the outlook of a peaceful further transition is much higher. So you see here real clear differences between Bargazal and Equatoria in particular, which is not unsurprising given that we know that the SPLM kind of stronghold is in Bargazal, and this is basically where the current leadership comes from. So of course there's a lot more buy-in into government in Bargazal than it is in Equatoria. Also interesting, and this then goes into the topic of elections already. We asked people how safe do you feel speaking publicly on politically sensitive issues. And before going into the results, the big question here is of course do people speak their mind? Even would people answer this question openly when we come and ask? And there is some indicators. Of course, we can never tell. I mean, we can never tell really what people think when they answer questions, no? But I'm fairly optimistic that this data, and also then the data on party popularity, I'm going to show that they are quite that people speak openly to us. First, I mean, we have always worked with researchers in the counties that are from the counties. So we would always work with people that come from the area. The interviews are done in the languages that people speak, and we give them a clear indication we are not a government agency, whatever. So they're safeguarded in the process. What we also see that the data is I mean, we have, I'm not going to show this in detail, but for instance in Yale we have more than 10% of the respondents telling us that they think NAS, like the National Salvation Front, is the most popular party for them. And they're not even signatories of the peace agreement. So if people would be really concerned speaking their mind, they would not, this wouldn't probably happen as a result. Because this is not something you tell, like this is nothing you would tell a government agent, like I'm sympathetic to NAS because they're fighting NAS, no? So there is several indicators overall that suggest that these numbers are kind of telling us something. And here again, it's also interesting across the regions. I'm getting some notes. 10 minutes, yeah. Yes, I'm progressing here. That again, like the trend that I've spoken before, that government is more popular in Barghazal, people all feel more safe speaking about political issues in Barghazal, obviously. Whereas in the Equatorias, you see quite a lot of concern speaking about public issues. The only detail, I mean, you look the areas you find yourself familiar with and see how it looks like. The most interesting detailed result here is Bor South, which is like essentially a territory that is mainly inhabited by Dinka communities. But here people feel incredibly unsafe speaking about political issues. Bor South is the bird from the bottom. Very red as you see. And this shows us some of the big political differences that obviously exist between Dinka Boer communities and what is at the moment the government, which is dominated by people from Moortat lakes and places. So you see here like fault lines coming up that might be a real issue for elections. Same here, as the national government cares about the communities, see again the same trend basically going across. So I have to rush a bit. So we come to the elections, and here basically the questions that we had: how do the people want to vote? How do they assess the risk with these elections? What needs to be in place for having credible elections? And finally, with whom people are sympathizing? Whom they would vote for? And here you see that people actually are quite concerned. It's getting better in the trend, again, but people are quite concerned about the risk of violence in relation to the elections. Still, almost 60, like in the last kind of rounds, about 60% of the people expect at least some election violence and even like a very high level of election violence to happen. It again differs depending on where you are, and there is not areas where there is a notorious high risk associated, but overall people are concerned. Still, when we ask people when should elections happen, you see, and basically that's the options we gave them: December 24, which is the green bar, as foreseen in the roadmap. We asked them, would you be open to a delay of a year or so, or some months, which would be in yellow, and then a long-term deferral or not having elections at all are the other results. And here you see that overall, more than 60% of our respondents want to vote December 24 as it is in the roadmap, with another about more or less 20% being willing to defer for a bit, but not more than a year. The interesting thing here is, and this is something which is really telling, when you break it down just to people who have who perceive the risk of election violence to be very high, you come to the exact same results. So any argument that people are concerned and therefore don't want to vote is wrong. And I think this is something which is really telling and really important to take into consideration when we talk about these elections, especially as kind of people want to vote, regardless of the potential risks associated with this. And this is something, I guess, especially as when we are not when coming with external support, this is something really to take into account, actually, when we think about this process. A few interesting glimpses. people also feel prepared to vote. When you ask people, do you feel like fine, like you feel prepared, can you vote? Do you think you can do that? And 90% would say yes. The reason for this is, which is also interesting for a country that never had elections, national elections in its existence, a vast majority of people have voted in national elections. About we had 80% yes, for people who were at age at that time that voted in 2010. In the last, basically, Sudanese elections where Sudan was still one country. So there was a considerable number of people taking part in these elections. There's also a lot of people who have voted in other national elections in neighboring countries or other countries. So there is kind of a high, it's not true that South Sudanese have never voted. It's just not true. It's interesting, you would kind of think it is like that, but not necessarily true. Also interesting, we asked people how would they approach voting, and over 80% would say, okay, we see voting as a free individual right. But here it becomes interesting. This free, fair individual right also corresponds with some ambiguities, because of these 80% who would say voting is my individual choice, and it's an individual right, 40% of them would also say yes, but I would like my family and my community vote the same way as I do. So this is both kind of there. And with that, we kind of, I guess, expect what is kind of logical also, that voting behavior would be a lot in communities. So we'll find a lot of blocks probably voting when these elections are going to happen, that communities would probably vote the same way, which is a very easy way then for campaigning for especially leading parties. Very encouraging here, would you vote for a political leader from another ethnic group? More than 70% would say yes to that, which is interesting, though when you break it down to ethno-linguistic groups, there is high differences. This is something which is particularly strong in the Equatorias. Interestingly, especially some that have a high, with long kind of tradition of political communities, there you find this is a very high kind of level, but essentially this comes from the Equatorias and it's a bit weaker in the northern parts of the country, among Dinka Nuer groups. Now, in terms of the preconditions, and I've said before, we have the issue that many of these preconditions won't happen. Just two of these elements. On the right-hand side, you find the question: do you want to see a permanent constitution in place before elections? And here, interestingly, people are quite flexible. I say, yeah, no, I'm kind of that this could be something which can be deferred for later, which I think is a fair assumption. But the big issue we face is on the left-hand side. Is a census necessary? And here you see that almost 80% of the people say, yes, we want a census. And this is an issue because we know a census is not going to happen. It won't happen. It's just not possible to pay for it. The time frame is too short. There's a rainy season coming up. It's not happening. The problem is why people want to see this is they have obviously kind of no trust whatsoever in the official population statistics. There came a statistic from NBS, National Bureau of Statistics, not long ago, which would assess Warrap as being populated, really overpopulated, and Jonglei being very, very weakly populated. In a way, not totally credible statistics. The next issue is when you look at how they want to create political constituencies, so basically the electoral constituencies for the first past the post, there will be 125 of them. So they won't be the same as the counties, which are 78. And here it appears, when you look even at the 2010 political constituencies, this is heavily leaning also towards Barghazal, especially towards Warrap and Lakes. So I assume here that, let's say, the government would be well advised to balance this towards other parts of the country and not run with this focus on favoring Warrap and Lakes in an electoral process. It would deeply hamper any credibility of this, even without rigging. And it will be also something which has to be taken into account in political communication, because if they want to have elections without a census, they need to communicate now that the census is not going to happen and how they still safeguard credible results. Finally, and with this, I'll be happy to hear that I'm going to close with this. Whom are people perhaps going to vote for? And here's the general element. Nationally, from this data, we have hardly any doubt that the government is going to win, which is hardly surprising given that basically in any kind of environment, freedom parties are going to win, with whatever kind of splits they're going to have. So this is not really surprising. Salva is a fairly popular president. I think this is fair to say. When you go a bit out of Juba, where he's probably not that popular, especially among civil society, you'll find basically lots of support. Salva is a popular president. I guess this is one of the big misperceptions you find when you talk about a country, where he's obviously, and here is the split with the parties across, where the government, of course, is not at all popular, is within the IDP camps and the POC side, which is logical because there is the former opposition, the armed opposition, and their families. Find them here. You see that SPLM-IO in blue has a fair majority in these environments. But overall, you see that there's no real challenge. The big issue is, with SPLM-IG being here in red, the very dominant party with about 40–50% popularity, that apart from IO, not a single party would hit the 4% threshold according to the data we have. So the only chance for them to get in is through first past the post, and then at state level. Just to break it down a bit, across regions again, and here this is the data I'm going to close with. Actually, when you look at this, it tells you two things. First of all, like the party popularity, again, as you've seen from the other graphs, obviously very high sympathies for the government and the ruling SPLM faction in Barghazal, to like a very mixed picture in Greater Equatoria. In a way, it explains first why the government wants to vote. And there seems to be a clear kind of rule, like decree almost from president going down. It's like, we want to have these elections happening. Because he would essentially get, at the national level, rid of the opposition. He even said, like Salva gave a speech 2 days ago where he said, like, we have 5 vice presidents, this is useless, what other country has this? So it's very clear that this would kind of streamline the political, basically, arena at the national level. But if you look at the detailed results, and you see here results, for instance, like when you look at Yei, when you look at other places, it's very, very likely that the government is going to lose some of the states. Especially Unity, there's no chance for the government even with rigging to win that. Central Equatoria, hardly any chance. Western Equatoria, doubtful if the government has a chance. And this would be actually, if they would be willing to accept this, something which is very good because everybody would kind of win something. Because perhaps like the opposition would lose out completely at the national level, but they would still win something. So if there is, funnily, when you look at basically these indicators, and I mean, like I have to say, we are in many parts of the country haven't been, but if there would be like an election process without kind of rigging, it suggests results that kind of everybody can live with. But these, of course, especially at these areas where the government is likely to lose at state level, this is probably the most risky element we're going to face, because when you remember 2010, where violence after the election started was in Unity, where basically the ruling faction was not willing to accept Angelina, who won Unity State pretty clearly, but they put Tamandengi in, and this was basically the start of the issues there. So the acceptance of losing at state level is probably the breaking point of any kind of electoral process if these elections are going to happen, but as said, I think it's kind of likely. With that, I'm going to close. Sorry, it took me more than I should have. Thank you.
This has been a very, very wonderful, objective and scientific presentation, an exciting one. Please, put your hands together again for Jan. Jan, congratulations. I hope you could all hear me. Is the mic working? Yeah. Let me thank you again. Brilliant. And apart from being scientific and objective, this is what we need. People need real data. What I was going to say as well, I really appreciate your enthusiasm. you spoke as if you are a local, as a South Sudanese. I mean, you reminded me of some British electoral pundits here. Very keen, very interesting, interested looking at the figures, analyzing them, and so on, and feeling passionate about the future. And I think a lot of people, if this was in the University of Juba or something like that, people will feel really that you are invested in what is happening. So thank you for that. My input is going to be very quick, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then we move into questions for Jan. So it looks good, but there are huge risks coming with these elections. And despite the good picture, I've just come back from Juba as well, and you can feel what you said about how people feel positive and peaceful about the country. I was in Juba, people go out until very early hours in the morning, and they feel positive and safe, and it is really, really great to be able to see that. However, that also is yeah, so the feeling of security I felt in Juba. I haven't been to other places in South Sudan, but you can feel it in Juba. Also, Rumbek has been spoken about. That's my home country. I haven't been able to go to Rumbek this year. I went last year, and it's the same thing with Governor Rin coming in. It took less than a month, 2 months, for the whole situation to calm down. Rumbek, for anyone who knows, since 2005, was ironic because Rumbek became the iconic center of the SPLM during the liberation period. And as soon as the whole liberation movement leadership moved to Juba to create a new capital, there was a vacuum in Rumbek, and violence erupted. And nobody has been able to resolve it until Governor Rin went in. So that's happy news for Rumbek. But regarding the peace situation generally in the country, especially in Juba where I have been, is actually quite remarkable. Coupled with that is the buzzing feeling you can feel about the economy and activity in the market, really incredible. Everybody's busy to make their lives better. Of course, the big men are up there stealing the money for the country's money and busy living a high life that normal people don't live. But the ordinary people are really, really busy to improve their lives if you're in Juba. I can see that. That's something positive. But talking about elections, it's true that Kiir feels positive. He feels that he can win. Obviously, we have this unusual situation that has been imposed by the peace agreement that has created 5 vice presidents and a very inflated parliament from around 300 to about 500 because of hand-picked people to create a balance between the warring factions. People resent that. People have a feeling because services are minimal. Of course, we know it's due to corruption mainly, but also people feel that a lot of money are going into the pockets of these people who don't warrant these positions, and that the government is too expensive, it has to be slimmed down. So that's one reason why elections are popular. But the reason Kiir loves the elections is because he knows and he feels that he can defeat all his enemies come the elections, and then they will be gone, he will be credible, he will have a slimmer parliament, and then he will have another tenure. But this will happen at a high risk, and I share the feelings with all the South Sudanese. This is highly risky, and it's not going to solve our problems. The South Sudanese problems are to do with communities not feeling safe and not trusting each other. And these have been these problems also that plague Sudan, and that's why Sudan is still unable to move on. In fact, as we speak, South Sudan is a nicer place than Sudan is because we take it in turns. If it is not them, it is us. And now there are all the Southerners, so many Southerners who were in the north are coming back, and many Northerners are coming back to Juba and to South Sudan. Lots and lots of them. Some of it is, of course, difficult because people are generally poor and desperate. But on the positive side as well, we are getting elites like doctors and things like that who are able to work in Juba. And I think we feel much better. I think it's really nicer for North Sudanese to come to South Sudan than to go to Egypt where they are treated more as aliens. But in South Sudan, they're always welcome. So it's a risk for Kiir to think that he can defeat his enemies, because we have to go to the root causes of the divisions. The divisions are ethnic and are about exclusion. So Sudan has been ruled by the same things, basically ethnic domination, violence against any objection to that, and thirdly also corruption. And those are exactly the same things that South Sudan has inherited from Sudan. And until we are able to address those things, any talk about winning elections is not going to be a permanent solution to South Sudan. That's all I can say. And